Imagine this. You were inside a 45-ton steel fortress. You're the army's elite. You were promised a wonder weapon that would save Paulus's encircled army. But instead of triumph, you hear a sound that makes your blood run cold. Not the explosion of a shell, but the quiet, treacherous crunch of metal breaking beneath your feet. Today, we will tell the grim story of the fall of a German tank corps that was destroyed by its own creators. You will learn how a microscopic crack in a blueprint turned into a mass grave for hundreds of crews, why German officers wept from powerlessness and burned secret documents while standing in the middle of a frozen wasteland. This is not a story about heroism. This is a chronicle of how greed and haste turned the world's best tanks into expensive steel coffins. Find out which specific part broke the Wehrmacht's back before the battle even began. The most terrifying enemies are sometimes not on the other side of the front lines, but in the rear, holding a gold fountain pen. Berlin, September 1942. In the office of Reich Minister of Armaments Albert Speer, the silence is deafening. It smells of expensive tobacco, polished oak, and old leather, but an experienced nose would catch a different scent in the air. The smell of burning, the smell of overheated metal, the smell of rotting flesh. It is here, in this warm and safe office, thousands of kilometers from the front, that a crime is being committed right now. A crime that in 3 months will kill more German soldiers than all the Soviet artillery at Kotelnikovo. At the massive desk, this isn't just a meeting. It is a tribunal over common sense. Blueprints are spread out on the table. The paper is thick, high quality. The lines are drawn with pedantic precision. The center of attention is the project for a new medium tank. The Panther, the hope of the Reich. The chief engineer of the MAN concern stands before the desk, his white-knuckled fingers gripping the edge of the drafting paper. He knows the numbers don't lie. He knows you cannot cheat physics with a party membership card. He tries to speak calmly, but his voice breaks into a dry, technical bark. Reich Minister, this is insanity. The transmission is rated for 30 tons. 30! Look at the specifications. After increasing the frontal armor and installing the new gun, the machine's weight has grown to 45 tons. The final drives will not hold. The shafts will twist at the first sudden jerk. This is not a tank. It is 45 tons of dead weight. Speer does not look at the blueprint. He looks at the graph of production capacities. In his eyes, there is no understanding of the mechanics of materials, only columns of numbers that must be presented to the Führer. Beside him sits a general from the Ordnance Office. His uniform is impeccable, but his competence ended with cavalry charges. He drums his fingers on the table, tapping out the rhythm of a funeral march. Engineer, your doubts border on sabotage. The general's voice is cold as a bayonet's steel. The Eastern Front demands new machines. The Russian T-34s are grinding us down. We need an answer. And we need quantity. 500 machines by December. The engineer takes a step forward. He forgets insubordination. He sees not a general, but ruptured crankcases and spilled oil on the snow. 500 machines? We haven't even finished the field trials. We don't know how the new lubrication system will behave at -20 degrees. We haven't checked the service life of the main drive gears. If we launch series production now, we will be sending scrap metal to the front. Give me 6 months, at least 3 months for fine-tuning. The gear teeth, they are raw. If we shorten the hardening cycle, they will crumble into dust after 50 kilometers. Speer finally looks up. It is the gaze of a technocrat who sold his soul for efficiency long ago. He picks up a pen, a gold pen that glints in the lamplight. We do not have 3 months. We do not even have 3 weeks. The directive is signed. Production begins immediately. Simplify the technology. If a double seam slows down assembly, make a single one. If hardening requires 48 hours, cut it to 24. We need tanks on flat cars, not in laboratories. The engineer goes pale. He hears the invisible backbone of the German tank industry snapping at that moment. Simplify the technology. These 3 words are a death sentence. Reducing the steel cementation time means the surface layer of the metal won't reach the necessary hardness. Inside, the metal will remain soft. On the outside, brittle as glass. Upon shell impact, such armor doesn't bend. It cracks, killing the crew with its own shrapnel. Under transmission load, the gear teeth will be sheared off as if made of wax. "You don't understand," whispers the engineer. "You are signing a death warrant for the crews. The machine won't make it to the battlefield. It will stall on the march. This is technical murder." The general stands up abruptly. His chair scrapes back with a crash. "Enough! Your task is to ensure the gross production plan. How you do it is your problem. If the MAN factory cannot fulfill the state order, we will find those who can. And we will find a use for you, Herr Engineer, where you can be of greater utility. For example, in a penal battalion, clearing minefields with your bare hands." Silence hangs in the office again. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock is audible. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Every second brings the catastrophe closer. The engineer is silent. He realizes he has lost. Arguments of reason have shattered against the concrete wall of political will. He rolls up the blueprint. The lines on the paper, designating the yield strength of the metal, no longer matter. Speer dips the pen into the inkwell. The ink is black, thick, resembling used motor oil. He places a sweeping signature under the order to begin serial production of the PZKPFW5 Panther. The scratch of the pen on paper sounds harsh, unpleasant. This sound is the sound of a snapping torsion bar, the sound of a high-pressure oil line bursting. At this moment, in September 1942, Paulus's Sixth Army is still fighting in the ruins of Stalingrad. They still hope for a breakout. They are waiting for winter storm. They believe the Reich will send them a wonder weapon that will break the ring of encirclement. They do not know that their fate has just been decided, here, in Berlin. Speer sets the document aside. The matter is closed. Next item. Supply of alloying additives for armor steel. We have a molybdenum shortage. We will have to reduce the additive content by 15%. The engineer closes his eyes. Reducing molybdenum content means the armor will become even more brittle in the cold. This is no longer just negligence. This is the methodical industrial destruction of one's own army. He walks out of the office, staggering like a shell-shocked man. In the corridor, he sees young officers laughing and smoking. They are discussing victories. They do not know that the tanks they will receive in 3 months are already dead at the moment of their birth. Behind the door of Speer's office, a chain reaction begins. The order goes out by telegraph. Teletypes in Nuremberg start clattering, punching out tapes with new standards. Factory directors clutch their heads. Shop foremen curse, realizing they will have to push out defective goods. But the machine is running. The conveyor belt of death is plugged in. The logic of war has given way to the logic of reports. No one in that office hears the future. No one hears how, 3 months later in the frozen steppe near Kotelnikova, at -30 degrees, a young lieutenant will be banging a wrench against the jammed final drive of a brand new Panther, cursing the designers, Hitler, and the very day this pile of useless metal rolled off the assembly line. No one sees how a Russian shell will strike the side of the immobile tank, and the over-hardened armor, deprived of molybdenum, will spray inward in a fan of deadly shards. All of this will happen later, but now, only the scratch of a pen. The signature is placed. The mechanism is launched. The first part of the catastrophe has fallen into place. Nuremberg, October 1942. The factory halls of the MAN concern never sleep for a second. Outside, the city is plunged into a blackout to hide from Allied bombings. But inside, blinding electric light burns. The air here is dense, heavy, saturated with metal dust, a suspension of machine oil, and the acrid smell of ozone from hundreds of welding machines. The roar is so loud that a human voice cannot be heard. People communicate by gestures or by screaming right into each other's ears. This is not the creative noise of industry. It is the agony of production pushed beyond physical limits. Here, among hydraulic presses and lathes, the Panther is born. But it is born already dead. In the hull assembly section, a foreman, his face blackened with soot, grabs a young welder by the shoulder. He points a finger at the clock hanging under the ceiling, and then at the unfinished seam on the joint of the frontal and side plates. The welder tries to explain something, pointing at an empty tank of high-quality flux, but the foreman doesn't listen. He slams his fist on the armor. The gesture is clear. Weld faster. The technical card requires making a V-shaped groove and passing the seam twice, first the root pass, then the cover pass. This ensures the monolithic nature of the structure. But a double pass requires twice as much time. The welder lowers his mask. The electrode strikes the steel. Instead of deep penetration, he lays a surface seam. The metal melts, flows, and solidifies in uneven bumps. From the outside, it looks like armor. Inside, deep in the seam, microscopic voids remain, cavities filled with slag and gas. These are time bombs. The penital cardinal upon the impact of a shell, even a non-penetrating one, the kinetic energy of the blow will travel through the hull in a wave. Healthy steel would spring back. This seam, weakened by voids, will simply crack. A multi-ton plate will fall off, burying the crew beneath it, or split along the seam, letting the blast wave inside. Further down the line comes the transmission installation. This is the heart of the tank, and here the main crime occurs. Gear-cutting machines work at limit speeds. Cutters overheat, leaving micro-scuffs on the surface of the gears. But what happens in the heat treatment shop is even more terrifying. The senior master of the heat treatment shop stands by the carburizing furnace. He looks at the thermometer and the shift schedule. The main drive gears must be saturated with carbon at high temperature for 48 hours. This creates a hard surface layer capable of withstanding colossal friction while leaving the core tough and elastic. If the time is shortened, the layer will be too thin. If over-hardened, the tooth will become glass-like. The shop door swings open. A military acceptance officer enters in a clean uniform that looks alien here. He holds a folder with daily quotas. "Why is batch number 42 still in the furnace?" His voice cuts through the hum of ventilation. "The train leaves tomorrow at noon." The master wipes his hands with a rag, leaving black oil streaks on it. "The process is not complete, Herr Officer. Only 24 hours have passed. The carburization depth is 0.8 millimeters, instead of the required 1.5. If we pull them out now, they won't withstand the torque. The Panther weighs 45 tons. When turning on soil, the load on these teeth is monstrous. They will simply shear off." The inspector doesn't even look at the instruments. He looks at the master as if he were an enemy of the people. "I have an order from the ministry. The front needs Panthers now. Not in 24 hours. Now. Pull them out." "This is sabotage," the master says quietly. looking straight into the military man's eyes. "You are sending scrap to the front. These tanks will break down before they see the Russians." "Sabotage is delaying the delivery schedule," the inspector barks. "Open the furnace, or I will call the Gestapo, and they will find someone who knows how to follow orders." The master pulls the lever. The heavy gate slides up. The furnace exhales heat. The batch of gears, glowing cherry red, slides out. They cool too quickly. The crystal lattice of the metal forms with defects. The internal stress in the metal right now, in this second, reaches critical values. The gear looks whole, shiny, deadly. But at the level of molecular physics, it is already destroyed. It has exactly as much life left as the tank needs to roll off the railroad flat car and drive a couple of dozen kilometers across the frozen steppe. The conveyor moves on. Assembly proceeds in a fever. Workers, dropping from fatigue, forget to install lock washers. Nuts are tightened not with torque wrenches, but by eye, until they crunch. Oil lines are laid under tension because the tubes were cut with a half-centimeter error. In the cold, these tubes, stretched like strings, will burst at the first vibration. In the quality control department, there is pandemonium. The QC engineers see everything. They see cavities on the turret casting. They see that the final drives are assembled with a misalignment. They see that the rubber on the road wheels is delaminating because the vulcanization technology was violated for the sake of speed. But they have no voice. The "passed" stamp is applied automatically. The controller's hand works like a machine. Bang, stamp, next sheet. Bang, stamp, next death sentence. "Sign it, Hans, don't look," an elderly engineer mutters to his young colleague, who is frozen over an engine test sheet. The engine overheats after 15 minutes of operation? It doesn't matter. It will cool down in the cold. "Sign it, or we will go to the Eastern Front together with these tanks, only as infantry." Tank number 521 rolls off the stocks. It smells of fresh dunkelgelb paint and factory grease. It looks menacing. The long barrel of the 75mm gun looks predatorily forward. The sloped armor seems invulnerable. It is a masterpiece of engineering thought, if looked at from afar. But if you get closer, if you put your ear to the cold side, you can hear a quiet, treacherous ringing. It is the overstressed metal ringing. It is the creaking of under-tightened bolts. A ferry driver sits in the driver's cabin. He presses the starter button. The Maybach engine roars, spewing a cloud of blue smoke. Too much oil in the exhaust. The piston rings haven't seated. The driver engages the gear. A jerk. The tank twitches. Deep in the hull, a dull metallic thud is heard. The driver pays no attention. His task is to drive the machine out the gates to the loading ramp. Outside the factory gates it is raining, mixed with snow. Tanks line up in long rows. Railroad flat cars are waiting. Locomotives puff steam, ready to carry this cargo to the east. Here, on the tracks, stand hundreds of machines. Hundreds of crews, who are still alive, await them somewhere near Rostov. They think salvation is coming to them. In reality, their doom is coming to them, packaged in 45 tons of alloy steel. A crane lifts tank number 521. The cables tense. The machine hangs in the air, swaying. A drop of oil breaks away from the bottom and falls into the mud. The final drive housing is already leaking. The gasket, punched from low-quality material, isn't holding the pressure. The train blows its whistle. A sharp, piercing sound, like a scream. The train starts moving. The wheels clatter over the rail joints. This rhythmic clatter carries the defective steel into the icy void of the Russian winter. In Nuremberg, the workshops continue to roar. spitting out more and more unfinished products. The plan is being fulfilled. The numbers in Spear's reports are growing, and the clockwork of the catastrophe, embedded in every weld seam and every gear tooth, has begun its countdown. End of November 1942. Unloading station near Kotelnikovo. The steppe around is dead and white. The wind here is such that it feels like it's flaying the skin off your face. But this sound is drowned out by a heavy, rhythmic clang. The train from Germany has arrived. Locomotives, shrouded in clouds of steam, breathe heavily like hunted beasts. On the open flat cars they stand, the new Panthers. They look flawless. Fresh winter camouflage, crisp crosses on the sides, predatory silhouettes. For the staff officers watching through binoculars, this is the steel cavalry that will save the Sixth Army. For the mechanics standing knee-deep in snow by the embankment, this is work. Heavy, dirty work. But none of them know yet that this is not reinforcement. This is a graveyard on tracks that was brought 2,000 kilometers to be buried here. Command to unload. Drivers take their places. Starters whine in the frost. The Maybach engines reluctantly wake up, spitting clouds of black, oily soot into the clear, frosty air. The first machine moves. The tracks screech on the wooden decking of the flat car. 45 tons of steel tilt, rolling over the edge of the ramp. The impact on the frozen ground reverberates through the soles of boots. The tank crawls onto the ground. It has driven only 10 meters, but the experienced ear of the repair company's chief master sergeant already catches a foreign sound. This is not the smooth hum of a powerful motor. It is an arrhythmic, painful knocking coming from the transmission compartment. The tank stops. The engine stalls. Silence. The master sergeant approaches the machine. He does not salute. He drops to his knees and crawls under the belly. The snow under the tank is no longer white. It is covered with dark, smoking spots. "Oil!" The master sergeant's voice sounds muffled from under the armor. "Transmission fluid! It's flowing like a stream!" He crawls out, wiping his hands on his pants. On his fingers is a thick, dark liquid with a metallic sheen. Metal powder. It is shavings. The gears started eating themselves back during loading in Nuremberg, and here, in the frost, the process completed. "The final drive housing cracked," he reports to the approaching lieutenant. "Micro crack in the casting, expanded in the cold. The oil leaked out. The gearbox is dry." The lieutenant, young, with an iron cross at his neck, looks at the tank, then at the mechanic. "This is a new machine, Sergeant. It just came from the factory. Fill it with oil and get in formation. We march in 2 hours." The master sergeant spits into the snow. "Herr Lieutenant, you didn't understand." The housing cracked. It's not a gasket, it's the casing. To replace it, we need to dismantle the drive sprocket, remove the final drive, take apart half the suspension. We don't have spare housings. We don't have a crane. We don't have time. This machine is a stationary pillbox. The lieutenant reddens. He shouts, demanding the order be followed. But physics is deaf to Wehrmacht orders. Tank number 521 is already dead. It died without firing a single shot at the enemy. Meanwhile, unloading continues. The situation repeats like a bad dream. Mechanics run from machine to machine. They open the transmission hatches and recoil from the smell of burning. The clutches are smoking. Friction discs made of ersatz materials couldn't withstand the load when driving off the platform. The third tank has a jammed turret. The electric traverse drive, assembled in haste, failed due to condensation shorting the contacts. The gunner inside bangs his fist on the manual drive hand wheel, but the grease inside has thickened and turned into glue. The turret looks to the side. useless and immobile. "What did they send us?" yells one of the mechanics, climbing out of the engine compartment of yet another Panther. In his hands is a piece of rubber hose. It crumbles in his fingers like dry bread. "The rubber is raw. It breaks in the cold. The cooling system will leak in 5 kilometers. The engine will overheat and seize." This is not just defects. This is sabotage, committed by the hands of exhausted workers and indifferent technocrats. Beautiful paint hides a rotten core. The weld seams on the hulls look neat, but if you look closely, porosity is visible. Armor designed to take a hit from a 76mm shell has internal stresses so strong it could crack from a sledgehammer blow. Staff officers begin to understand the scale of the disaster. They walk along the rows of unloaded equipment, and their faces turn gray like the winter sky. Of the battalion of the newest tanks, barely half are combat ready. And this combat readiness is conditional. The battalion's chief engineer gathers the company commanders. He holds a dipstick for checking oil levels. His hands are shaking with rage. Reporting the situation. Of the 60 machines unloaded at this moment, 12 have leaking final drives. 8 have cooling system problems. 5 have electrical failures. 3 have metal shavings in the engine oil filters. This is a factory defect. Systemic. "How far will they go?" asks the battalion commander. His voice is dry and businesslike, but there is emptiness in his eyes. 50 kilometers, the engineer cuts him off. Maximum 70 if the mechanics pray. Then mass failures will begin. The transmission is not calculated for this weight and these materials. The gears are made of steel with reduced alloying elements. They are soft. They will be chewed up. We are going into battle in disposable machines. This is a one-way ticket. The wind strengthens. It whistles in the radio antennas, sings a funeral song in the gun barrels. Tankers, just arrived from the warm barracks of Germany, stand in groups by their machines. They smoke, hiding the cigarette glow in their sleeves. They hear the mechanics' conversations. They see the oil spots on the snow. The euphoria of possessing a wonder weapon vanishes instantly, replaced by the sticky cold of fear. They realize their main enemy right now is not the Russian artillery hiding somewhere over the horizon. Their enemy is their own tank. A tank that can betray them at any second. A tank that, instead of protection, will become a steel coffin. The commander of the 1st platoon approaches his machine. He runs his hand over the cold armor. The metal burns his fingers. "Start up!" he commands, but there is no confidence in his voice. Warm up engines every 2 hours. Watch the oil temperature. If the needle goes into the red zone, shut down immediately. The crews climb inside. Hatches clang. Inside the tanks, it is cold as a crypt. It smells of paint, grease, and hopelessness. Drivers look warily at the instrument panels. Every light bulb, every needle can now become a messenger of death. Chaos reigns at the station. Attempts to fix what was broken back on the blueprints continue. Hammers bang. Cursing is heard. Someone tries to weld a cracked casing, but the weld won't hold in the frost. Someone wraps electrical tape around burst hoses. This is agony, an attempt to resuscitate a corpse. And somewhere out there, 48 kilometers to the east, the 6th Army is freezing in the encirclement ring. They are waiting for rescuers. They do not know that the rescuers themselves need help. The Panthers stand on the snow, growling with their motors, shrouded in steam. Beautiful, powerful, terminally ill. The first act of the tragedy is complete. The scenery is set. The actors have taken their places, but the play's script has been rewritten. Instead of a heroic breakthrough, there will be a chronicle of technical decay. Headquarters of the commander of the 4th Panzer Army, Hermann Hoth. December 1942. In a frozen dugout, lit by a dim kerosene lamp, lies an operational map. On it, a blue arrow is drawn. It looks short, almost toy-like. The distance to Paulus's encircled group is 48 kilometers. For a functioning tank on a summer highway, that's an hour's drive. For a column of Panthers with factory defects in the transmission moving across the icy steppe, it is infinity. General Hoth stands over the map. His face expresses no emotion, only fatigue. He knows tactics, he knows strategy, but he does not want to know the mechanics of materials. For him, a tank is a tactical unit, a rhombus on a map. For the tank battalion commanders standing before him, a tank is 45 tons of betrayal. The task is clear. The general's voice is dry, like crackling branches in the frost. Breach the Soviet defenses, reach the encirclement ring, secure a corridor. Operation Winter Storm is scheduled to begin on December 12th. Questions? A heavy pause hangs in the dugout. The battalion commanders exchange glances. These are not the looks of warriors eager for battle. These are the looks of engineers being forced to build a bridge out of rotten wood. One of them, a captain with a frostbitten face, steps forward. Herr General, the state of the material is critical. Of the arriving reinforcements, 30% of the machines have suspension defects before even moving. We have no spare final drives. We have no replacement torsion bars. If a machine breaks down in battle, we cannot evacuate it. The tow trucks won't start. Hoth looks up. There is ice in his eyes. There will be no spare parts. The trains with repair kits are stuck near Kharkov. Use the method of cannibalization. Strip parts from hopeless machines. But on the 12th, you must go forward. Paulus is waiting. It is an order, but it is also a sentence. The order ignores the laws of physics. The method of cannibalization means killing some tanks so others can live a couple more hours. It is the agony of the mechanism before the first shot. Outside, in the wind that cuts to the bone, the crews are lined up. Men wrap themselves in greatcoats, pull wool balaclavas over their heads. But the cold outside is nothing compared to the cold inside the fighting compartments. The hull steel is frozen through. Touching the armor without a glove strips the skin. Commanders return to their men. No fiery speeches, no words about Greater Germany. Only dry, technical instructions sounding like an epitaph. "Listen up!" yells an Oberleutnant, trying to shout over the wind. March distance is 48 kilometers. Stops are forbidden. Shutting down engines is forbidden. If you stall, you are corpses. Batteries lose 50% capacity in an hour in this cold. You won't start again. Silence stands in the formation, broken only by coughing and the clatter of bolts. The tankers look at their machines. Brand new, painted in white winter camouflage, they look like ghosts. But the crews know the truth. They know that inside these beautiful boxes is a time bomb. The driver of the first company, Gunther, whispers to his radio operator, "Did you hear the sound when we drove it here? There's a howl in second gear." It's the input shaft bearing. It's dry. At the factory, they forgot to pack the grease or put in that crap, the ersatz stuff that solidifies at -10. Right now, it's -30. The grease has turned to stone. The bearing will crumble in 10 kilometers. "So what do we do?" asks the radio operator, teeth chattering. "Nothing. Pray that it doesn't happen under fire from Russian anti-tank guns. We have a one-way ticket. We're walking back. If we make it." "Mount up!" Hundreds of people simultaneously start climbing onto the armor. The iron is slippery with frost. Boots slip. Cursing and the thud of bodies against metal are heard. Hatches slam shut, cutting the crews off from the world, locking them in tight steel coffins. Inside the tank, it smells of condensation, unburnt gasoline, and fear. Drivers press starter buttons. Inertial starters spin up with a whining squeal. This sound is like a dentist's drill working right in the brain. Engines cough, shoot into exhaust pipes, throwing out torches of fire. One by one, the Maybach motors come to life. The roar is such that the ground shakes. But the experienced ear distinguishes false notes in this chorus. In the third tank on the left, the engine is misfiring. Spark plugs are flooded. In the fifth tank, a metallic clicking is heard. Valves aren't adjusted. Gaps have shifted due to thermal deformation of the cylinder heads. The airwaves fill with the crackle of static and voices. Adler 1, Adler 5 reporting. Transmission oil pressure is 0. Gauge is flat. Request permission to shut down for inspection. The commander's reply sounds sharp as a shot. Belay inspection. Move as long as the tracks turn. If you stop, burn the machine and transfer to armor with a neighbor. We wait for no stragglers. This is the essence of the tragedy. German pedantry, demanding perfect maintenance of equipment, smashed against the reality of haste. Regulations written in blood in peacetime are now thrown into the snow. No warming up the transmission, no checking track tension, just pedal to the floor. The column prepares to lunge. 48 kilometers across an icy desert. Ahead lies Soviet artillery, minefields, and infantry with grenades. But the tankers don't fear them. They fear the moment when the thin oil film on the main drive teeth ruptures. When overheated metal meets overheated metal. When 45 tons of steel, deprived of mobility, turn into a perfect target. Engines roar at high RPMs, warming up. Exhaust gases shroud the column in a dense blue fog. Visibility is 0. Tanks stand bumper to bumper, like a herd of sheep awaiting slaughter. In the cabin of the lead tank, the commander looks at his watch. The hand approaches the appointed time. He picks up the throat microphone. His throat is dry. All crews, commence movement. Forward. The clank of shifting into first gear in dozens of machines merges into one grinding sound. The tanks jerk. Tracks bite into the frozen earth, tearing out chunks of soil hard as granite. The column moves. The march of the dead has begun. They're driving to save Paulus, but each of them knows they need to save themselves, and there will be no salvation. Physics passed its sentence back in the blueprints, and now it proceeds to execute the punishment. December 12th, 1942. Dawn over the steppe brings no light, only a gray haze mixed with ice crystals. Operation Winter Storm has begun. The column of the 57th Panzer Corps begins to move. It looks like the awakening of a giant, sick beast. The roar of hundreds of engines tears the silence, but there is no power of victors in this roar. There is the strained howl of mechanisms working at their limit. First kilometers of the march. Speedometers count off hundreds of meters, seemingly a negligible distance, but for defective steel, it is a marathon for survival. Outside temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius. Inside the transmission compartments, hell begins. Oil thickened overnight has turned into a viscous substance resembling tar. Oil pumps whine, trying to push this mass through narrow lines. Pressure in the system jumps to critical values. Rubber hoses connecting lubrication system nodes have lost elasticity in this cold. They have become hard and brittle, like cheap glass. Pop. A dull, wet sound inside the hull of tank number 312. The oil supply hose to the left cylinder bank has burst. A jet of boiling, black liquid under 6 atmospheres of pressure hits the red-hot engine manifold. Instantly, the engine compartment fills with thick, acrid white smoke. The smell of burnt oil penetrates the fighting compartment in a second, causing coughing and tears among the crew. Stop! Cut it! We're on fire! The tank commander's scream drowns in static. The driver slams the brakes. 45 tons of inertia drag the machine skidding across the ice. Tracks screech, striking sparks from stones hidden under the snow. The tank stops. The engine goes silent but continues to hiss as it cools. The crew spills out of the hatches right into the snow. They cough, spitting out black saliva. Faces are smeared with soot. Hands shake, but not from cold, but from adrenaline and anger. They open the engine hatch. A cloud of steam escapes. There is no fire, but the engine is soaked in oil. "Hose," states the mechanic, wiping his face with an oily rag. "Split lengthwise. Rubber casting defect. I told you they were dried out." The column does not stop. The other tanks drive around their broken brother. And this is where the second act of the technical tragedy comes into play. Bypassing an obstacle requires maneuvering. Drivers yank levers, forcing one track to brake and the second to spin faster. The load on the side clutches peaks at this moment. Friction discs, manufactured violating the powder metal sintering technology, cannot withstand it. They are supposed to slip smoothly, transferring torque. Instead, they seize. Screeching, a piercing scream of metal on metal that sets teeth on edge. Tank number 405 twitches in convulsions while attempting to turn. The drive sprocket locks up. A dry, ringing snap is heard, like a pistol shot. The torsion bar of the front road wheel suspension has snapped. Over-hardened steel, deprived of necessary toughness due to accelerated heat treatment, couldn't twist and simply broke. The tank lists to the side like a stricken ship. It freezes across the road, blocking the platoon's movement. The airwaves explode. Radio channels are jammed not with tactical commands, but with hysteria and cursing. "Panther 7, stopped! Gearbox jammed in third, lever won't move. Panther 2, water temperature 110, we're boiling. Radiator's cold, thermostat didn't open. Commander, I have 0 oil pressure, shavings in the filter." These are not combat losses. The horizon is clear, no Russians. But the battalion is melting before eyes. Of the 120 machines that started the march, 15 have stopped after 10 kilometers. Every 8th machine is taken out of action by its own manufacturer. Repair trucks moving at the tail of the column cannot cope. Mechanics work in inhuman conditions. The wind blows away tools. Wrenches freeze to mittens. To unscrew one nut in the cold, it must be heated with a blowtorch. But there aren't enough blowtorches. Near a tank with a broken track, a crew bustles. The track link snapped right at the pin. A casting defect, an air pore in the metal. To replace the link, the pin must be knocked out with a sledgehammer. The mechanic winds up. Impact. Ringing. The pin doesn't move. The metal has shrunk from the cold. "Hit harder!" yells the commander, looking at his watch. "We're falling behind schedule. They'll court-martial us." The mechanic hits again. The sledgehammer slips and strikes the armor plate. The sound is dull, like hitting a tombstone. The link doesn't budge. This is a contest of human muscle against the laws of physics, and physics is winning. Steel is hard, but brittle. People are soft, but stubborn. In the end, both break. Along the road, like milestones of defeat, stand immobile hulks. They look whole, armor unpierced, guns looking forward. But inside are dead mechanisms, ground-up gears, snapped shafts, burnt clutches. The crews of these tanks remain in the icy desert. They are ordered to wait for evacuation that will not come. They burn documents, warm themselves by cooling engines, and listen to the wind howl in empty gun barrels. Meanwhile, the head of the column continues to move. But this is no longer a march. It is agony. Drivers are afraid to touch the control levers unnecessarily. They drive only straight, trying not to change engine RPMs. They feel the floor vibrating under their feet. This vibration is the death rattle of the transmission. The teeth of the main drive gears have already started to crumble. Metal dust mixes with oil, turning it into abrasive paste that devours the mechanism from the inside. Every kilometer comes at the cost of colossal wear. A resource calculated for thousands of kilometers of travel burns out in minutes. The cooling system cannot cope with the thermal shock. The engine is hot, while the radiators are blasted by icy air. A temperature imbalance occurs. Cylinder heads begin to warp. Gaskets burn through. Antifreeze starts leaking into the cylinders, mixing with oil. The result is an emulsion, a grey, useless sludge that finally kills the engine. By noon, the road behind the column is littered with black oil spots, broken track pieces, and abandoned machines. This is not the trail of an army going on the offensive. This is the trail of a wounded animal bleeding out. In the headphones, the regiment commander's voice sounds. He demands increased speed. He demands making up time. But he demands the impossible. You cannot order metal to be stronger than it is. You cannot order the laws of thermodynamics to retreat before the Führer's will. Panther number 511 stops on the crest of a hill. A column of fire a meter high shoots from the exhaust pipes. The valves are burning out. The engine, assembled violating tolerances, has seized. Pistons have welded to cylinders. The crew silently climbs out. They look to the east. There, in the distance, the rumble of cannonade is heard. Paulus is fighting there. Still 40 kilometers to him. 40 kilometers of snow, ice, and absolute technical hopelessness. This march is a crime. A crime of engineers who agreed to simplify the design. A crime of technologists who allowed shortening processing cycles. A crime of politicians who drove raw machines to slaughter. And paying for this crime right now, on December 12th, are simple tankers freezing in the wind next to their useless, expensive steel toys. The day leans toward sunset. The frost strengthens. Metal starts to ring from tension. Steel becomes glass-like. And ahead is night. Night which will finish off those who are still capable of moving. The horizon flares up with dirty orange light. The roar of Soviet artillery covers the steppe like a heavy blanket. The first real battle for the battalion of new machines. This is the moment of truth they were prepared for on proving grounds. But a proving ground is a sterile laboratory, and here is the dirty, chaotic reality of war. And in this reality, Panthers start dying not from hits, but from their own shots. Tank with tactical number 412 takes a position on a ridge. The gunner is glued to the sight. The Zeiss optics are flawless. They give a clear picture of a Soviet T-34 going into attack at a distance of 800 meters. It is a perfect target. The long-barreled KWK-42 gun is capable of punching through it. "Armor piercing!" shouts the commander. The loader shoves the shell into the breech. Clang of the bolt. Fire. The 75mm gun ejects the projectile with a muzzle velocity of almost 1,000 meters per second. The recoil is monstrous. Recoil devices must absorb this energy, smoothly returning the barrel to place. But the hydraulic fluid in the recuperator cylinders has thickened in the frost. Seals made of low-quality synthetics have hardened and lost their seal. Instead of a soft recoil, a hard impact occurs. Metal hits metal. Recoil energy, unabsorbed by hydraulics, transfers to the gun trunnions and the turret itself. Mounting bolts of the traverse mechanism experience extreme shear load. Inside the tank, a crunch is heard. This is not the sound of penetrated armor. It is the sound of the machine's skeleton breaking. The shell strikes the Soviet tank, which bursts into flames. But the Panther crew does not celebrate victory. "Turret jammed!" yells the gunner, spinning the horizontal traverse handwheel. "It won't move!" The recoil shock deformed the turret race. The ring gear, manufactured violating roundness tolerances, has become oval. A microscopic displacement, just 2 millimeters, deadlocks the multi-ton structure. The electric traverse motor whines, trying to turn the jammed mechanism. Windings heat up. The smell of burning insulation fills the fighting compartment in a suffocating wave. Now this tank is not a predator. It is a pillbox. It can shoot only directly in front of itself. Any target appearing from the flank becomes a deadly threat. To their left, another crew tries to perform an evasion maneuver. The driver sees the muzzle flash of a Russian gun and sharply yanks the lever left, giving full throttle. Tracks bite into the frozen ground. The soil here is hard as concrete, with frozen stones. The track links experience colossal tensile stress. The steel from which the links are cast has high carbon content, but little nickel. This makes it hard, but brittle in the cold. Upon a sharp side impact against a stone, the track pin doesn't bend. It snaps. A ringing click is heard even through the engine roar. The track belt breaks. Inertia spins the tank sideways. It loses momentum. It freezes in the middle of a snowy field, exposing the most vulnerable side, where armor is thinnest, to the blow. "Track! We've thrown a track!" The driver's voice breaks into a squeal. At that moment, a solid shot hits the side. The armor holds. The shell ricochets, leaving a deep gouge, but the kinetic energy of the impact, millions of joules, travels into the hull. The weld seams, those same ones welded in haste in a single pass, cannot withstand the vibration. The inner surface of the armor plate spalls. Metal flakes off. Razor-sharp shards of their own armor fly inside the tank like shrapnel. They slash equipment, tear wiring, dig into the crew's bodies. The tank is whole on the outside, but inside is a meat grinder. The driver falls onto the levers, soaking them in blood. The tank continues to roar with its engine, standing in place like an animal paralyzed by fear and pain. The battle turns into a beating. German tankers, the elite of the armored forces, find themselves hostages of their equipment. Their professionalism is powerless against factory defects. The commander of the 3rd Company tries to organize a retreat. "Everyone back! Take defensive positions behind the height! Reverse!" Drivers engage reverse, and here the Panthers present a final surprise. The ZFAK-7 gearbox is a highly complex unit with synchronizers. In ideal conditions, it works like a clock. But now the oil in the box is overheated to 120 degrees, and the gears are worn by abrasives. When attempting to shift gear under load, the synchronizers crumble. Reverse gear teeth do not engage, but beat against each other with a machine gun rattle. "Gear won't engage. Lever kicks out." Reports from different machines sound like carbon copies. The tanks cannot drive backward. They can only crawl forward or stand and die. Crews frantically yank levers, skinning their hands to blood. They curse the designers who made the gearbox so delicate. They curse the factory workers. They kick the transmission in impotent fury. Soviet tanks are closing in. T-34s, crude, simple, with large tolerances in mechanisms, keep coming. They don't fear mud, they don't fear frost. Their transmissions clatter but work, while German high-precision mechanisms suffocate from their own complexity and low-quality materials. In tank number 405, a fire breaks out. Not from a hit. A fuel line, laid too close to the exhaust manifold, burst from vibration during firing. Gasoline gushed onto red-hot metal. The fire suppression system fails. Nozzles are clogged with scale. Fire instantly engulfs the engine compartment. The bulkhead between the engine and fighting compartment heats red hot. "Abandon machine!" shouts the commander. The crew opens hatches. Cold air rushes inside, fanning the flames. Tankers jump out into the snow under machine gun fire. They run from their machine, which is turned into a torch. Behind them, the ammo rack explodes. The turret, the one that jammed 5 minutes ago, flies into the air, tumbling like a toy. The battlefield is littered with black metal. Smoke trails along the ground. The German attack has choked, not because the enemy was stronger, but because the weapon designed to kill killed the faith of its soldiers. Tankers surviving this hell hide in craters. They look at their burning Panthers not with pity, but with hatred. In this hour, in the heat of battle, a final break occurs, a psychological break. A soldier can forgive a commander's mistake. A soldier can forgive a lack of food, but a soldier will never forgive when a rifle doesn't shoot or a tank doesn't drive. It is here, on this nameless field, that faith in German technology died finally. It burned along with the clutches and crumbled along with the over-hardened gears. Silence descends on the steppe only toward evening. But this is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a technology graveyard. Hundreds of tons of expensive metal, on which thousands of people labored, are now just trash cooling in the wind. And Paulus's encircled army is just as far away. Only now, there is no hope of reaching them at all. The technical resource is exhausted. Morale is destroyed by the physics of destruction. The horizon in the east pulses with a crimson glow. This is not dawn. This is burning Stalingrad. Exactly 3 kilometers remain to it. This is a distance an infantryman runs in 15 minutes, and a healthy tank dashes through in 5. For the crews of the Wehrmacht's 57th Panzer Corps, fighting through the icy hell for 19 days now, these 3 kilometers are not a distance. They are an abyss. Of the 120 machines that began this insane march, 58 remain in formation. They no longer look like parade steel. They are black with soot, with stripped paint, caked in dirty ice. They crawl forward not thanks to engineering thought, but in spite of it. The metal of their transmissions is beyond the fatigue limit. A critical amount of defects has accumulated in the crystal lattice of shafts and gears. Micro cracks born back in Nuremberg have connected into major fractures under the load of recent battles. The catastrophe awaited only the final trigger. And this trigger becomes the order. Full speed! Attack on the move! The commander of the lead battalion sees signal flares rising over the cauldron through binoculars. Paulus is waiting. The commander presses the push-to-talk switch. Target in sight. All machines, full throttle. Squeeze out everything left. Drivers floor the accelerator pedals. Engines howl, reaching maximum RPMs, 3,000 per minute. And at that moment, paralysis strikes. In tank number 213, what engineers call welding under load occurs. There is almost no oil left in the gearbox sump. It boiled away or leaked through hardened seals. The third gear wheels, heated red hot by the friction of dry steel on dry steel, engage. But they don't turn. The temperature at the contact patch instantly jumps to melting point. The teeth fuse into each other, turning the complex gear-shifting mechanism into a single, immovable monolith. Impact. The tank noses down as if hitting an invisible wall. The engine, rigidly connected to the seized transmission, stalls with a sound as if a grenade exploded inside the cylinders. The crankshaft, unable to withstand the flywheel inertia, twists like a screw and snaps at the second journal. "Jammed!" screams the driver. He throws both hands and his entire body weight onto the gearshift lever, trying to rip it into neutral. The lever doesn't yield. It vibrates with a fine tremor, transmitting the mechanism's death throes into the driver's hands. "The box fused! I can't disengage! Following 213, the entire vanguard begins to die. It is a chain reaction of wear. Tanks running at the limit cannot withstand the sharp load spike. To the right, Panther number 502 stops. It sheared the splines on the final drive semi-axles. The shaft spins idly, with a screech that bursts eardrums. Tracks stand still. 45 tons of steel turned into real estate in a split second. The tank commander bangs his fist on the commander's cupola. He sees the glow over the city. He sees Russian tanks moving to the flanks, but he cannot move even a centimeter. His tank is alive, the gun is loaded, the crew is ready for battle, but the running gear has betrayed them. The airwaves go silent. No more orders. Only short, panicked reports merging into one continuous groan of dying technology. Stopped! Main clutch burned out. Drive shaft sheared. Vibration extreme. No movement. Transmission disintegrated. The attack chokes. Not from enemy fire. It stops by itself. 58 tanks, forming the final fist of Hoth's strike group, turn into 58 steel tombstones. The momentum of the offensive, accumulated for weeks, vanishes. The battlefield fills with a strange, surreal sound. The roar of guns ceases for a second, and a mechanical gnashing becomes audible. It is the sound of breaking teeth, the sound of metal grinding metal. The crash of destroying gearboxes drowns out even the noise of the wind. Inside tank number 444, the gunner looks through the sight. The crosshair lies on a Soviet gun. "Driver, short forward," he commands. "We're not moving," the driver answers quietly. He sits, hands dropped. Under his feet, under the transmission hatch, a crunch is heard. Down there, the planetary steering mechanism has turned into a pile of metal shavings and debris. "Shaft destroyed. We've arrived." 3 kilometers. This distance is now insurmountable. Visual contact with the objective makes the situation unbearable. Crews see the place they were supposed to reach, but physics has put a period. Factory defects, embedded in the design to save non-ferrous metals and speed up assembly, worked more effectively than any minefield. Tankers open hatches. Cold air rushes into red-hot fighting compartments, stinking of burnt oil. They look west, from where they came, and east, where they never reached. The realization of catastrophe comes instantly. This is not a tactical retreat. This is the end of hope. The battalion commander in his immobilized machine rips the headset off his head. He looks at the map. The blue arrow abuts the red encirclement ring. Between the arrow tip and the ring is the void of the white steppe. "Report to Army HQ." His voice sounds dull, like a dead man's. "Offensive halted due to technical reasons. Material losses, 100%. We are shifting to defense in place." Defense in place for a tank in the open steppe is a death sentence. An immobile tank is just a big, highly visible target. Soviet artillerymen already see that the Panthers have stopped. They begin ranging. First bursts land near the frozen machines. Fountains of frozen earth and snow fly into the sky. But German crews don't even try to maneuver. They know any movement with the lever is useless. They are trapped in their high-tech snares. An engineering miscalculation made in a warm Berlin office turns into a slaughter here, near Stalingrad. The driver of Tank 213 takes a family photo from his pocket. His hands are black with oil he tried to pour into the shattered crankcase. He looks at the photo, then at the temperature gauge. The needle is frozen at maximum. The engine cools, crackling. This sound, the crackle of cooling metal, sounds like the last heartbeats of a huge, complex organism created for war, but dead from its own weakness. On the horizon, a new series of flares goes up. The encircled are asking for help. They don't yet know that help stopped 3 kilometers from them. That winter storm ended not with a thunderclap, but with the dry click of a snapped shaft. The history of the battle has just changed. And it wasn't changed by generals, but by the mechanics of materials. The airwaves explode with a short, barking word more terrifying than any artillery barrage. Retreat! The order is not subject to discussion. Operation Winter Storm is officially declared a failure. But the HQ order ignores the physical reality of the battlefield. To retreat, a tank must turn around. And for the 57th Panzer Corps, a 180-degree turn is not a maneuver. It is a technical impossibility. On a narrow strip of icy road stand dozens of machines. The driver of tank number 314 receives the command to turn around. He squeezes the left clutch lever and gives gas. The right track should spin, the left brake. This creates colossal torque on the final drive shaft. Inside the reduction gear, the final catastrophe occurs. The teeth of the driven gear, already pitted and weakened by microcracks, cannot withstand the lateral load. A sound resembling the crunch of breaking bone is heard, only amplified 100 times. The shaft shears. The track remains motionless. The tank jerks and freezes. It cannot turn. It cannot drive back. Reverse was knocked out an hour ago. It can only stand nose to the enemy, having turned into 45 tons of useless scrap metal. "We won't turn around!" screams the driver, losing his voice. "The final drive disintegrated. Left track is dead." There are dozens of such machines. The engineering miscalculation of MAN designers, multiplied by production haste, turned elite armored vehicles into stationary targets. They are trapped on the road, blocking the way for the few still capable of moving. A traffic jam forms, a giant jam of burning and broken equipment. Crew commanders realize evacuation is impossible. There are no tow trucks. They froze back at the unloading station. Leaving the newest secret tank to the enemy is forbidden. The Wehrmacht instruction for this case is extremely specific and cynical. Item 4 of the Operation Manual paragraph, destruction of material assets by crew forces. The most humiliating act for any tanker begins, the murder of one's own machine. The commander of Tank 412 takes a thermite charge from the stowage. It is a small, cylindrical block. He opens the gun breech. Inside the breech block is precision polishing, a mirror surface created for perfect obturation of powder gases. The commander pulls the pin and throws the charge into the barrel. The flash is blindingly white. The burning temperature of the thermite mixture is 2,500 degrees Celsius. The steel of the breech doesn't just melt, it flows like wax. The bolt welds to the barrel solidly. A gun costing tens of thousands of Reichsmarks turns into a crooked piece of iron in 3 seconds. The driver in the engine compartment does his part. He smashes the fuel filter with a hammer. Gasoline flows onto the hot cylinder block. Then he throws an M24 stick grenade in there. "Let's go! Run!" The command sounds like salvation. A dull, guttural explosion. Engine compartment hatches fly outward. Flame greedily engulfs the Maybach engine. Rubber hoses burn, wiring melts, oil flares up. The fire spreads to the ammo rack. The steppe is illuminated by hundreds of bonfires. These are the hopes of the 6th Army burning. These are millions of Reichsmarks burning. This is the labor of thousands of workers burning. The sight is apocalyptic. Black silhouettes of tanks against white snow and red fire. Turrets are blown off by shell detonation, and they tumble into the snow, hissing with red-hot metal. Crews, transformed into infantry, run. They run past their burning machines. They slip in mud mixed with oil. Tanker coveralls are not designed for forced marches in frost. Boots slide. People fall, get up, run again. Dialogues in the retreating crowd are full of hatred. This is no longer an army. This is a mob of deceived people. "Tell them in Nuremberg," wheezes a sergeant major, dragging a wounded radio operator. "Tell those desk rats to drive their own gearboxes. 50 kilometers. It went 50 kilometers and died." "My clutch burned out before the battle," another voice responds from the dark. "I burned a tank that didn't even fire. We just brought them scrap metal." Chaos grows. The road is jammed. Those tanks still running try to bypass burning comrades through virgin snow. But in the dark, they hit rocks and ravines. The crack of snapping torsion bars is heard. Suspension, brittle from frost, can't take the hits. Another Panther tips onto its side in a ditch. The crew doesn't even try to pull it out. They just jump out, douse the transmission with gasoline from a jerry can, and strike a match. No heroic rearguard defense. Only panic, destruction of evidence of their own incompetence. Officers burn documents. Maps, forms, orders, combat logs fly into the fire. The wind scatters ash across the steppe. Paper burns faster than steel, but the shame will remain forever. "Burn the machine log," yells a lieutenant to his mechanic, "so no one knows we stopped because of a burst tube. Write direct shell hit. Write it all off as combat losses." This is a lie born right here, by the burning carcass. No one wants to admit that the wonder weapon turned out to be defective junk. The reports will say, destroyed by superior enemy fire. But the truth lies here on the snow. It is puddles of oil that leaked from cracked crankcases before shooting began. Russian tanks don't even pursue the fleeing. They don't need to. General Frost and engineering miscalculation did all the work for them. Soviet troops simply occupy territory littered with expensive German scrap metal. They walk past burning Panthers, looking with surprise at these strange, huge machines that killed themselves. Retreat turns into flight. Men drop personal weapons to run easier. They drop tools. They drop faith in Germany's technical superiority. In their heads, there is now only one thought: survive. Get away from this disgrace. Forget the sound of grinding, breaking steel. Behind, 3 kilometers from Stalingrad, the sky is black with smoke. Pillars of greasy soot rise into the stratosphere. This is the elite 57th Panzer Corps burning out. It didn't burn in battle. It burned from friction, from overheating, from metal fatigue, and from criminal negligence of those who put quantity over quality. The wind drives drifting snow across the steppe, covering the tracks of fleeing men. But it cannot cover the burning tank hulks. They will stand here until spring, black monuments to engineering failure. Iron cools slowly, but the men running west cooled instantly. Their hearts are full of icy emptiness. They know. They lost the war of machines. Supply Service Headquarters tent, deployed deep in the rear, 40 kilometers from the front line. December 24th, 1942. Outside, the steppe wind howls, tugging at canvas walls as if trying to get to the warmth. Inside, it smells of cheap tobacco, ersatz coffee, and paper dust. At a folding table piled with stacks of crumpled, dirty, oil-soaked reports sits Oberleutnant of the Quartermaster Service, Stolz. He didn't see battle. He didn't burn in a tank. His weapons are a slide rule, an ink pen, and an adding machine. But what he sees before him now scares him more than the sight of advancing infantry. Stolz is balancing the ledger of Operation Winter Storm. This is the accounting of catastrophe. Before him lies a blank final report form for Berlin. Combat losses column and technical losses column. His hand hovers over the paper. The numbers don't match the propaganda. The numbers scream of a crime. He picks up the first write-off act. Tank number 412. Cause of loss: fire in engine compartment. Mechanic's explanation written in shaky handwriting: fuel line rupture due to vibration, fuel ignition on exhaust manifold, destroyed by crew. Stoltz puts the sheet in the left pile. This is not a combat loss. This is a design defect. Second act. Tank number 505. Destruction of final drive during attempt to turn. Gears sheared. Machine blown up. Left pile again. Third act. Engine seizure, overheating. Cause: thermostat failure. Left pile. Stoltz cranks the adding machine handle. The machine's clatter sounds dry and rhythmic, like earth hitting a coffin lid. He sums it up. The total is terrifying. Of the total number of lost machines, only 32 units were destroyed by Soviet artillery or tank fire. 32. These are the ones who accepted an honest fight, those whose armor was pierced by an enemy shell. The rest of the numbers are a verdict on German industry. 65% of the total fleet of Panther tanks participating in the operation were lost without enemy impact. Stoltz looks at this figure. 65%. 2/3 of the newest tank corps self-destructed. The enemy didn't spend a gram of gunpowder on them. They weren't killed by Russian anti-tankers. They were killed by German lathe operators rushing to meet quotas. They were killed by technologists who replaced quality rubber with a surrogate. They were killed by metallurgists who skimped on molybdenum in the alloy. Stoltz picks up a fountain pen. He needs to write an explanatory note for the table. How to explain to headquarters that an elite unit equipped with a wonder weapon ceased to exist without reaching the target? He writes, "The nature of the damage is of a systemic production character." This is a soft phrasing. In the language of facts, it sounds different. "We drove scrap metal into the steppe." He takes the summary of spare parts consumption. This is another document of shame. Requests for final drive replacements exceed stock availability by 200 times. Requests for torsion bars by 150 times. This means the designers knew about the weak points. They knew the transmission was the Achilles heel of the 45-ton monster. But they released it into series production. Stoltz closes his eyes. He imagines this picture. Not a map with flags, but the real landscape. The steppe near Kotelnikovo has now turned into the most expensive scrapyard in human history. Visualizing the statistics scares with its scale. Imagine a column 10 kilometers long, and every third tank in this column stands with open hatches being covered by snow. They aren't black from external explosion soot. They are whole. Their paint isn't scratched by shrapnel, but they are dead. Under their bellies are puddles of frozen oil. In their transmissions is metal crumble. Stoltz recalls the cost of one Panther: 117,100 Reichsmarks. He multiplies this figure by the number of abandoned machines. It results in a sum that could build a whole city, or arm an infantry division with reliable, proven weapons. But this money is now simply rusting in the Russian steppe. The officer stands up and walks to the map hanging on the tent wall. On it, locations of knocked-out equipment are marked. Black crosses are combat losses. Red circles are technical failures. The map looks like it has measles. The entire space along the offensive route is littered with red circles. Groups of 3, 5, 10 machines. Graveyards of ambition. Here is a group near height 119. 12 red circles. A whole company. The company commander's report says, simultaneous engine failure due to use of non-conforming oil. 12 tanks lined up as if on parade, and froze. Stoltz returns to the table. He must finish the report. He enters the final data. Total core losses, irrecoverable. 100% of equipment participating in attack. Of which, due to technical reasons, 104 machines. Crews saved, 40%. Equipment evacuation, impossible due to lack of tow trucks and deep snow cover. This document will go to Berlin tomorrow morning. It will be placed on Albert Speer's desk. Perhaps Speer will wince. Perhaps he will even give the MAN factory director a dressing down. But it will change nothing. Dead machines won't come to life. Dead crews frozen next to their broken tanks won't return home. Stoltz stamps it. The dull thud of the stamp on paper. On the imprint is an eagle holding a swastika in its claws. But right now, this symbol looks like a defect brand. The Wehrmacht's quality control department, which let this defect through to the front, essentially became the Red Army's most effective ally. He puts the sheets in a folder. The folder is thick, heavy. In it is a chronicle of technical decay, the story of how haste and window dressing defeated engineering genius. Stoltz extinguishes the kerosene lamp. In the darkness of the tent, he thinks he hears not the wind's howl, but that same sound that haunted tankers for the last 3 weeks. Grinding. The grinding of breaking gears. Statistics are cold. They feel no pain. But in these dry columns of numbers, 65% defects, lies the tragedy of a whole generation. A generation given a broken sword and sent to die. The factory conveyor in Nuremberg worked faster than the burial teams, and now the accounting of death is reconciled. Debit, the Reich's ambitions. Credit, an icy desert littered with steel. Balance, negative. And it is paid for with the blood of those who believed German machinery doesn't break. Stoltz lies down on his cot, covering himself with his greatcoat. He knows tomorrow he will have to write off winter uniforms that never reached the encircled troops. But that will be tomorrow. And today, before his eyes stand endless rows of panthers frozen in absurd poses in the middle of white silence. Monuments to negligence. Steel tombstones of the 6th Army. Hamburg, 1952. In a smoke-filled beer hall on the outskirts of the city sit 3 men. One is missing his left arm up to the elbow. The second's face is a map of burns where human emotions are hard to read. The third simply sits silent, staring into a glass of schnapps. This is not a meeting of friends. It is a wake. And they are not drinking to those killed by a bullet. They are drinking to drown out the sound that still rings in their ears. Not the whistle of shells, but the dry, glassy crunch of snapping steel. When historians in clean offices draw thick operation arrows on maps, they see strategy. They discuss Manstein's genius, missed opportunities, and fatal coincidences. They move tokens on paper, not understanding that these tokens were broken before they were put on the board. Former driver Kurt, sitting in the beer hall, knows the truth that won't be written in generals' memoirs. He knows the Battle of Kotelnikovo was lost not in December 42 in the steppe. It was lost in September, in Nuremberg, in a warm shop, when a technologist signed a permit for simplified gear hardening. It wasn't a Russian shell, Kurt says, his voice creaking like an unlubricated hinge. We just stopped. Clutch. Discs fused. We sat in that box and waited. We heard them coming. We could shoot, but we couldn't move. We were a pillbox. An expensive, useless pillbox. This is the main lesson of that winter. A lesson written in fuel oil on snow. Faith in a wonder weapon is the most dangerous illusion of war. Germany prayed to technology. Engineers created the Panther as a masterpiece of technical thought. Long-barreled gun, sloped armor, interleaved suspension providing a smooth ride. On paper, it was the perfect killing machine. But war is not fought on paper. War is fought in mud, in frost, in conditions where the perfect breaks and the crude survives. The Soviet T-34 was crude. It had gaps in the armor through which the wind whistled. It had a gearbox that had to be shifted with a sledgehammer. But it drove. It started at -30. It could be fixed in an open field with a crowbar and swear words. The Panther was a prima donna. It required high-octane gasoline, special oils, a warm garage, and a team of college-educated engineers for maintenance. Sending such a machine into an icy hell without preparation, command committed an act of sabotage against its own army. Technocratic arrogance killed more German soldiers than enemy strategy. Albert Speer and his department chased numbers. They needed thousands of tanks in reports for the Führer. They substituted the concept of combat readiness with gross output. A tank that rolled off the assembly line was considered a combat unit, but a tank whose transmission resource is 150 kilometers is not a combat unit. It is a disposable product. At the table in the Hamburg beer hall, the former company commander strikes the table with his healthy hand. "We weren't betrayed by generals," he says angrily. "We were betrayed by engineers. They knew. They knew the final drives wouldn't hold 45 tons. They saw the metal fatigue graphs, but they stayed silent. They feared for their jobs, and we paid for their fear with our lives." This is the terrible truth of industrial war. Negligence on the drawing board turns into a bloodbath on the battlefield. One incorrectly calculated tolerance in microns, one saved alloying additive in steel, results in thousands of death notices. Mechanism complexity without reliability is suicide. The more complex the system, the more chances it has to fail. The Panther consisted of thousands of parts, and any one of them could be the cause of death. The T-34 consisted of hundreds of parts, and there was almost nothing to break. History loves winners, but one must learn from losers. The German tank industry of 1942 showed the whole world how not to make weapons. You cannot sacrifice reliability for specs. You cannot put untested technologies into series production in the midst of war. You cannot think metal quality can be compensated by crew fanaticism. Fanaticism ends where the crankshaft snaps. When the engine is silent, ideology is silent. Only naked, ruthless physics remains. Inertia, friction, resistance of materials. You cannot negotiate with these forces. You cannot intimidate them with a court-martial. If a gear is overhardened, it will break, even if the order was given by Himmler himself. The veterans finish their schnapps. They have nothing more to say. They survived, but part of their souls remained there, in the frozen steppe, chained to cooling metal. They remember that smell, the smell of burnt synthetic rubber and red-hot oil, the smell of technical defeat. The final shot of our investigation returns us to where we started, the steppe near Kotelnikovo, present day. The wind still drives drifting snow across the endless plain. It is quiet here. Only the feather grass rustles. But if you dig up this mound, if you remove meters of earth, we will find it. The skeleton of Panther tank number 521. It has been lying here for 80 years. Its armor has rusted, but is still strong. The turret looks east, towards Stalingrad, which it didn't reach by 48 kilometers. Inside, in the engine compartment, among dirt and plant roots, lies the cause of its death. A cracked final drive housing. a small crack in the metal that stopped a big machine. Snow begins to fall, slowly covering the rusty hatch. Nature takes back its own. Metal returns to the earth from which it was mined. Imperial ambitions crumbled into dust. Only a cold, objective lesson remains. War is an exam for machines and people. And if a machine is made of lies and haste, it will kill the one sitting in it faster than any enemy. The screen goes dark. Only the whistle of the wind is heard, and, at the very end, a quiet, receding metallic grinding, the sound with which hope dies when steel breaks.